Okay, so I gave the hub here a good scrubbing down with the wire brush, got the loose rust off of it, cleaned it off, and then I decided to just give it a small coat of paint on there just to make it look a little nicer and maybe keep it from rusting again. So the only thing on this car that's going to prevent this Mazdaspeed brake parts from being a bolt-on deal is this lip right here on the dust shield for the rotors. This is designed to be just slightly larger than the original rotors, but because our new brake rotors are almost an inch larger, this is now going to hit the rotor. So I'm going to just do the simplest thing here. I'm just going to go around the diameter and just fold this lip up so that it's just flat like that. And that's going to not only help cover the additional diameter of the rotor, it's just easier and cleaner than cutting it off. Well, much like my boss said when he hired me, it's not pretty, but I think it'll work. All right, we've got our new brake rotor here. Now, one quick note, or two quick notes actually, before I put this on. These are directional. They do have a specific side. I just noticed this one, if you can see that there, it's got an R on it, which means it's the right side. This is the right side of the car. But they also, the vents and the pattern here is directional. And if you look at the instructions before installing these, you'll see it shows you in there which rotor is supposed to go on which side of the car. This is the correct rotor for this side of the car. Now also we've got the countersunk holes here that go for where those screws go. So make sure that those are lined up before you slide it on. There we are. And since we've got those screws, I'm going to put them back in just to hold the rotor on while we do the work with the brake calipers. The other note about this brake rotor specifically, most brake rotors, when you get them, when they get shipped to you, they're shipped with a coating on them. It's sort of an oily coating that keeps them from rusting when they're sitting on the box. These ones specifically say do not use brake cleaner on them. Normally with new brake rotors, you'd use a brake parts cleaner or alcohol or something to wipe off and clean off that oily coating because you don't want oil or any sort of lubricant to get on brake pads. This sort of defeats the purpose of braking if you lubricate it. But these ones specifically say do not use brake parts cleaner, do not use anything to clean off these brake rotors because they have a specific coating on them that helps with the break-in process. So that's one of the reasons I'm wearing the gloves, so I don't get oil from my hands onto these brake rotors because I can't clean them off. So anyway, those are put on there. We've got good clearance between the heat shield back here and the brake rotor. If we give it a spin, you don't hear any horrible scraping noises, which means it's not touching anywhere. And I did look back there and check to make sure that it wasn't close at all. So let's go grab our brake caliper and get that put on here. So now it's time to get this brake caliper off of here. Now, you probably can't see that very well. I'll show you better when it's off the car, but it's got a hydraulic hose that's holding it on here. And it's also got, on the back here, the parking brake lever where it hooks up to the cable. So take the parking brake cable off first. All right, so I've got the clip off, the little clip that holds it on there. So I can slide the cable out now. In theory. It's a little bit stuck in there. There we go. All right, there's the cable loose. So now I've just got the hydraulic hose. I'm going to put a set of my pinch-off pliers on there just to pinch the brake hose so that it doesn't leak brake fluid all over the place, make a huge mess. Now give that just a tap. Take it off. Take that off of there. I'm going to hold on to the hardware just for the moment. Take that loose. And now our caliper is out. So the brake caliper has this lever here on the back. This part moves, this part is fixed. This is what holds the cable in place and keeps it from sliding. This is where the cable attaches to the brake. And what it does just to apply the parking brake is it basically squeezes this portion together. The cable contracts when you pull it and pulls that part together, applies the brake. So I need to swap this bracket here over to the new brake caliper. So I'll go do that. Okay, so I'm just going to slide this back in here. I've got to put the cable onto the new caliper here. Move that into shot. I've got to put the cable through this little loop here on the new caliper, then run it through the bracket here. So put that through there, pull it a little bit, slide that into the little groove in the bracket there. Again, I'm sorry if you can't see that on camera. All right, put the clip on there. Now we can just sort of set this aside for the moment because we still need to put the caliper bracket on there. All right, so we've got the parking brake all set up, the parking brake cable at least all set up on the brake caliper here, so I can go ahead and just set this aside. But before I do, there's a couple of things I want to make note of here. First off, when you're installing a brake caliper, make sure that the bleeder screw right here is facing up. It's on the top side of the brake caliper, because these calipers usually are just mirrored side to side. So they're almost exactly the same. A lot of times the only difference between them is that the bleeder screw on one side will be installed on the other side of the caliper. So if you install it on the correct side, the bleeder screw will be pointing up like this. If you install it on the wrong side, a lot of times that bleeder screw will be pointing down and you'll never be able to bleed the air out of the brakes. So they are directional, they do go on a specific side. Make sure you get it on the correct side. I'm going to put a little bit of purple goo here on the parts where the caliper contacts the brake pad. It just helps cut down on some squealing usually. Time to put on the caliper bracket. I've already got it installed, or got the brake pad clips and everything, the hardware installed in there as well as the brake pads, so it should just slide on. There we are. Perfect fit. And as usual, we've got blue Loctite here on the bolts just to make sure that they don't rattle loose. Get that bolt started. There we go. Get the other bolt started. This bottom one's just a little bit tricky because there's a suspension arm that goes right behind it. Makes it difficult to get the bolt in there. All right, let me grab my torque wrench. I'll get those bolts torqued to factory specification. All right, got those bolts torqued to spec. Now we can put the caliper on. Now the only real note on the caliper installation here, because this has the parking brake built into the caliper, zoom out here just a touch. The caliper has some slots in it that align with these little pins on the brake rotors, or excuse me, on the brake pads. So when you go to install this, just make sure that the pin is going to fit properly in that caliper piston. Usually if it's just straight up and down, that's the way it needs to be. So I'll get that slid on there. It's a little bit of a tight fit because they're all brand new brake pads, rotor, everything. So it just barely fits on there. There we go, that's installed. So one more quick thing as I'm getting the brake caliper on here. Remember, this was the bolt that held the old caliper on there, that held the caliper to the bracket. This is the one that holds the new caliper to the bracket. So when I was doing research for this online, I heard several people say, or saw several people say, that the caliper was the same, that it was just the bracket that's different. Unfortunately, that's not going to be the case. You might be able to change some of this hardware around or something and maybe make this work. I kind of doubt it though. I don't think that you'd have to tap the holes in the caliper here to be able to accept that, and they're not even the same size. So you could possibly make it work, but I wouldn't suggest it. Just get the whole caliper. This is a 2004 though. They might have switched it in 2006, because I know that they did change the front brakes in 2006, so maybe they changed the rears as well. But at least on a 2004, you need the whole caliper and bracket. You can't just use the bracket. So we'll get these bolts installed. Gotta find the hole. Get that one started. Get the bottom one started. Okay. This newer caliper design it sort of screws into there's a threaded part on top of the caliper pin, the sliding pin, that the bolts go into. And with some of these designs, you have to hold that caliper pin with a separate wrench, like this, in order to screw it in. Okay, I'll grab my torque wrench and get those torqued to factory spec as well. Okay, caliper is bolted on, everything looks good there. Now I just need to get the brake hose hooked up. As we're assembling this, we've got two of these copper crush washers. We need to put one on there first, then slide the screw, the banjo bolt I should say, through the fitting. Put the crush washer, the other crush washer on the other side, so that you have one crush washer on either side of that bolt. You see that? One crush washer on either side. Now I'm going to take the clamp off of there, and we'll install that. And when you're putting this brake hose on there, make sure that it's not twisted when you're putting it on. Make sure it doesn't have any weird curly cues in it as you're trying to put it on, because that puts a stress point on it and can actually damage the hose over time. And you don't want to break hydraulic hose braking. It's not a fun time. There's also a little, right next to the fitting for the brake hose here, there's a little drilled hole in the caliper. And that hole is for a little nub to come off of the brake hose. It keeps the brake hose properly aligned as you're fitting it in there. So, that's our brakes installed. Alright, so now that we've got the brakes installed on the car front and rear, it's a good time to bleed the brakes. We've got all new calipers on there, we have to do that anyway. But since I've got to do that, and I don't know how old this brake fluid is or if it's any good, I'm going to go ahead and do a full system flush, get all new brake fluid in there. So I've already got the cap and the screen off of there. Just took those out and set them over here. So now I'm going to take all of the brake fluid out of here, or as much as I can. Now, I've got professional tools, but you don't necessarily need professional tools to do this job. It's something that you can do pretty simply in your driveway. But because I've got the tools, I'm going to use them. So I've got my vacuum pump here. I'm just going to suck as much of this brake fluid out as I can. So I've got as much of the brake fluid out of there as I can. Most of the time these brake fluid reservoirs are sort of chambered, so it's hard to get all the fluid out, but I can't see anything else left in there except for down at the very bottom. So it should be good to go. So now I'm going to refill the reservoir with some fresh brake fluid. This is what I'm using. I'm going to use .4. I'm not particularly for this brand or whatever, but what I wanted to say here is that .4 fluid, this vehicle would normally take .3. That's what it says here on the brake reservoir cap. But .4 is backwards compatible with .3. It's perfectly fine to use in a system that's for .3. The difference is that .4 fluid will boil at a higher point, a higher temperature than .3. So it's actually better to use in performance applications. And as I said, it's perfectly fine to use this in any car that calls for .3. So this is a brand new container of brake fluid. I just opened it just now. That's generally the best thing that you can do, especially if you're going to be taking your car on a track where you're going to be getting the brakes really, really hot. The reason for that is that brake fluid absorbs moisture. It'll even absorb the moisture just out of the air. So if this container's been opened and sit open for a long time, it'll absorb moisture. If the cap has been left off of it, just sitting on the shelf, you might as well just take the whole thing and throw it away, because that brake fluid is going to be so full of moisture. It reduces the boiling point when that happens, and it makes it not particularly useful in a brake application. So I'm going to try and pour this without spilling it. Ooh, good shot. So I'm going to fill it up pretty much to the top, right about there. put the cap back on it. And then, as I said, I'm going to be using professional tools because I have them. So I've got a pressure bleeder here for the brake system. Basically what it does is it puts pressurized brake fluid into the master cylinder there, and then you go and open each of the bleeder screws to push the air and the old fluid out, push new fluid in. So I've got an adapter here that fits the Mazda. I'll get that put on. So this is the brake bleeder that I have. Just barely fits in the picture there. It works okay. It's not an amazing one, but it does the job just fine. So I'm going to get this filled up with brake fluid and then get it pressurized, and we'll start bleeding the brakes out. Okay, I've got my pressure bleeder filled up here. I'm just going to hook up the hose. Leave that there, and then I'm going to put some pressure in the reservoir. Okay, I've got that filled up to 15 psi, which should be plenty for this system. So let's go to one of the wheels and crack the bleeder screw open. We'll see how this works. We are back at the right rear brake caliper on the car, same one we just put on there. So when you're bleeding the brakes on any car, you always want to check with the factory service manual or with a service manual for this particular vehicle, just to make sure that there's nothing special. But generally speaking, when you're bleeding the brakes on a car, you want to start at the brake caliper or the wheel cylinder that is the furthest from the master cylinder, the one that is the furthest distance from the master cylinder. On this particular car, that is the right rear wheel. So we're going to start bleeding the brakes here. I'm only going to show you this one because it's basically the same on every corner. So because we just painted these brake calipers and I don't want to mess them up, I'm going to take a little length of rubber hose and put it on that bleeder screw so that we can drain it out under the vehicle instead of draining it onto the freshly painted brakes. So I'm going to stick my wrench on there first, and then put the hose on there. Kind of a tight fit, but that's what we want. I'm going to put a bucket over here so that we can collect the brake fluid. Okay, now I'm going to crack this bleeder screw open. It's just the same righty-tighty, lefty-loosey as everything else, so just give that a bit of a shove. That should be open now, so we'll see what comes out of our hose. And we got some fluid coming out. So now we've just got to let that go until the fluid comes out clean. Just getting the wheels and tires put back on the Mazda here. I hadn't lifted it up in the air yet, but as I was putting the wheels and tires back on, I noticed this. So that over there is water, and that over there is water. But this right here, that's not water, that's oil. I had a little bit of a sniff. It seems like it's gear oil, and it looks like it's coming from back there. So let's wander around here. That's kind of looking suspiciously like an axle seal. Yep, you can see the axle's all wet up there. Let's see if we can sneak up this way. Have a look. Yep, see that? It's just underneath the axle seal there. So, apparently that axle seal is leaking. If you remember from the inspection video, or one of the earlier videos, I think it was the inspection video, I had mentioned that the gear oil on the transmission was really low. And I don't remember the transmission being wet when I did the video before. Like, it was wet here. I remember that part. But that's coming from the engine and leaking down from the backside of the engine. I don't remember it being wet back there. So, I guess I get to replace that axle seal now. Well, that's it for the brakes. We've got all the brakes taken care of front and rear here on the Mazda. But as you just saw in that little clip, apparently the Mazda is not ready to go back out on the road yet. It got afraid and decided to wet itself. So axle seal, I'm sure that was a failed item already. the transmission was low on fluid, as I'd said in a previous video. I didn't see it leaking before, but after I filled it up, apparently that's raised the fluid level up enough that now it's going to leak out on the ground. So whatever, I bought the vehicle as is, knowing that it needed some work, so I can't really complain, can I? I bought it needing work. So for the meantime, that's it for this video. You head on down there to the like button, hit the like button if you like this video. If you didn't like this video, then otherwise, if you have any questions or comments about anything, just leave them down in the comment box below. I will respond as much as I can. If you'd like to see more videos like this, hit the subscribe button. If you'd like to be notified when I post up a new video, whether it's here in the shop or out in the car or doing whatever I'm doing, just hit the bell button down there. Other than that, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching.